Greetings, listeners. Your old hunts are back. Prepare yourselves for season 2 of Paranormal Hunt with Keely Sterba and guests. Leave the lights on. The Spooky Stories podcast begins now.
Hi everyone, I'm Keely Sterba with C21 Tri-Cities. Welcome to Paranormal Hunt Season 2 Spooky Stories. Today I want to talk about a urban legend type thing in the Tri-Cities called baby graves. And it's a topic that's well known around the Tri-Cities or on the internet. It comes up a lot when you look up spooky stuff in the area. And it's got quite a few stories that I was able to dig up, and it's got a little bit of history. From what I gather, the history part is true. Some say the spooky part is true as well. And I guess that's for people to decide on their own. So first, the grave, from what I was able to research, is 100 years old. It was put there by the pioneers. I guess it goes to the crossroads of different streets at the hills of Kennewick. Now, I haven't been there yet. Maybe me and Leslie can go visit it next year. But I think she's visited it in the past, from what she had said before. But so I think it's at the hills of the outskirts of Kennewick, and the pioneers had, back in the 1800s, had put these graves there. And back then, people did lose their children at young age, different diseases and stuff that we now, control, and we don't necessarily lose our young ones. And so from my understanding, it is all babies. It's not adults. So I don't know if that part's true or if it is just a regular old cemetery. Without going and checking it out, I guess, and seeing for sure, but sounds a little spooky to go visit too. So I got a couple stories to share that I'll kind of go over. So this one says, last night we went out to Baby Grave Cemetery and got the crap scared out of us. The cemetery is weird. It's over 100 years old and it has nothing but babies buried there. They said that if you go there at night and are really quiet, you can hear the babies crying, maybe for their mommies. It wasn't easy to find the place. It's located at the hills outside of Kennewick, and the roads wind in and out of the hills, and there isn't really any landmarks. Anyway, we got there and walked around, and Tom started getting silly, yelling for ghosts to come out. He even rapped on one of the headstones with his flashlight. We didn't know that the babies had a guardian. There's an old man who lives in a shack not too far away, and he came out running out of it, screaming at us. He was yelling that he was going to kill us, and he had a baseball bat in his hand. We ran to our cars, and we got in them, but didn't have time to turn around. He actually backed down the dirt road and almost went off the road into a ditch, and the man caught up with us. He swung the bat and hit the windshield and cracked it. Tom gunned the engine and we left him behind, but he still followed us until we made it back to the main road. I have heard that I keep hitting this, that this is man in a truck and he follows you to get off the property. And if you're there in the dark, I guess the headlights just suddenly disappear. Almost as if it's a ghost man. I don't know, but that's some of the stories. I think that was a story that Leslie had told, one of her experience, that she had saw the truck and the headlights disappeared suddenly. And so I'm sure everybody's heard of Weird Washington. It's a website, but it's also a book, and you can look up all kinds of weird things about Washington, and you can find some things about the Tri-Cities. Well, this is in there. That's why I decided to go and talk about it, because it's in this book, so might as well talk about it. So in the spring of 2007, Weird Washington visited the Baby Grave Cemetery Tri-Cities resident Eric C. He had driven by a few times, but he hadn't stopped for long. We found that, like all legends, stories of the baby graves was partially true and partially false. We found the cemetery standing near the crossroads of several different roads. These roads probably dated to the years when all the homesteaders laid out their claims and put in roads around the property lines. The pioneers probably agreed to have community cemetery in the central place rather than having a separate family plot near each farmhouse. So that could be, or maybe it's not just young children. Maybe it is, maybe that part's the false part. Within the cemetery is a small picket fence. It was the only feature that we could see of the cemetery from a distance. It was once white, but most of the paint is peeled off. A heavy iron gate and barbed wire fence marked the cemetery entrance. Outsiders can count 10 tombstones, several of which have been broken over the years. Someone stole the tops of 2 markers, leaving the stone bases buried into the ground. There is no telling how many people were actually buried in the cemetery, since many of the old tombstones were probably wood and have rotted over the years. Money was always scarce in the old days, and some of the stones markers had double duty, particularly if the dead were children. Only the remaining families know for sure how many dead rest uneasy in the baby grave cemetery. These remaining stones mark out at least 12 graves, 7 of which are children. So it's obvious that people visited the cemetery every now and then. A survey of the cemetery a few years ago showed 10 intact grave markers. In 2007, Weird Washington found the tops of 2 were missing. Several of the remaining stones were scratched or broken. There were buried out road flares, fireworks, and a few beer cans around the cemetery. People go there and hang out and party and stuff. Obviously, this place was a hangout for local parties, but there was evidence that more benign visitors did not completely abandon the cemetery. The iron fence was decorated with red ribbons, and someone had left a toy rabbit for the Pearson boys. That's sad. Fortunately for Weird Washington, there was no angry man carrying a baseball bat living in a nearby shack. Perhaps he had left over the years. Even so, with so many families buried in the cemetery, it's likely that some of the pioneers lived nearby. The closest house is about a mile away, and we have been watched through the binoculars as we toddled through the baby grave cemetery. So I think somebody does watch and watch over them. And then there was a note to Weird Washington. It said, "Dear Weird Washington, it is a family grave site. I know the family that owns the property, and they will defend their own. They do ask that no one bother their family." So some of this, it's kind of spooky that there's somebody that chases them up, but maybe there's a family. It's a meaningful, backstory to somebody, and so they do maybe protect their land and chase partiers, people that are going to go party and hang out and trash the place and scare them off. But nonetheless, it's still a little spooky and not a place that you necessarily want to go visit unless you're brave. And if anybody's got stories that they want to tell that they've went, feel free to reach out to us. I'd love to hear the stories of your experience there and what you experienced, if you heard anything, if you saw anything, if you saw the man with the bat, if the headlights disappeared out of the blue. Would love to hear it. But that's just a really interesting story about our area that sounds sad, which is very sad, but it's got a long backstory to it. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for next week. The topic will be serial killers of the Tri-Cities. I'm going to discuss, there has been 1 or 2 that have grown up in our area and even some that have passed through. So stay tuned.